right, it is 4 o'clock. I'll call to order the second monthly meeting of the Hendersonville City Council, July 22nd, 2026. Have an agenda in front of you. Are there any additions or deletions from the agenda?
Mayor Volk, members of council, I'd like to remove the consent agenda item. You will see that back on your August agenda. We'll get a little bit of work to do on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else anyone would changed? No? Motion to approve the agenda.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the agenda as amended.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Not. Those in favor of approving the agenda as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Ayes have it. Motion carries, and we have our agenda. So we will move right into presentations. First one, I guess, Mr. Detweiler, you can talk about the Half Moon Heights erosion control update, or who is doing that? Yep.
Good
you are.
afternoon.
Okay.
Sorry. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. So I was here last fall about Half Moon Heights, that development and some impacts that they were having on the downstream properties in Wolf Chase, existing subdivisions. So this is just an update specifically after a couple of rain events that happened in June, late May and June. Here's just as a reminder, a little order of events. So I think I had a brief presentation last fall. I think it was in September. And then in December, Henderson County had issued prior NOVs. Those were closed on the condition that Wolf Chase stormwater devices and trail repairs be completed. And then late May 26th, a storm event caused some flooding in Wolf Chase. June 3rd, Henderson County inspects the site, identifies erosion control deficiencies with a 14-day correction period. June 11th, an additional storm event caused some sediment-laden flooding in Wolf Chase. And then a site meeting happened on June 18 with Four-Star, the developer, Terraflex, the contractor, and Seaman Whiteside, the engineer for Four-Star, to discuss corrective measures. Then there was a flooding event on June 29th. It was a 2-inch rain, very localized rain event out in that area. And the Wolf Chase HOA submitted formal complaints via email to the City Council and Henderson County Commissioners. We met with Four-Star, I think it was the following, I want to say that was a Friday. I think we met the following week. And the Henderson County staff were part of that meeting. Henderson County issued a formal notice of violation, and I'm here to just present an update tonight. This afternoon, notice of violation, current site conditions. This is just a summary of the NOV. Deb Johnston from Henderson County is here if you have any specific questions about the NOV, but was issued on July 2nd. The cited violation was sediment discharged off-site into Wolf Chase roads and stormwater control devices. Required actions: repair and maintain erosion control measures, evaluate additional measures with a design professional, restore sediment damage to Wolf Chase homes and stormwater devices, and most importantly, no new land disturbing activity performed or permitted until the site is back in compliance, except for approved stormwater bypass work, which the folks from Allie Seabaugh is here from Four-Star. She can maybe get into what happened at those June events, but there was some existing work that was taking place where the stormwater couldn't get on the site where it needed to be, so basically it kind of went onto the neighboring properties and into the street. Stormwater and sediment control permit will not transfer to DR Horton for house building permits until the site is compliant. And then the compliance deadline is 30 days from receipt. The pictures on the right are some that I took last Friday out on site. So the area mostly, I believe, in question, and again, Ally might get into this, but phase 3 lots had been regraded and a ditch was being cut in when some of these rain events happened. This was the condition on July 17th, so much more put together. It's hard to see on here, but there was seed that was put down, some ditch stabilization in place, and then some stormwater infrastructure work had been put in. And then, as again, Ally's here from 4-Star, as well as I believe the senior vice president, regional vice president from 4-Star is here. They can answer some questions and also kind of provide an update on corrective actions that have been completed. You saw some of those on the slides, and what's been underway in response to the NOV. Timeline for bringing the site back into compliance. I want to say I think it's been stated that some of that's coming. Okay. 29th. And then some long-term measures to try to stay ahead of future runoff issues, including, it's important to keep in mind that there will be transitioning to vertical home construction at some point. So there will be parts of the site that will remain kind of not permanently stabilized while homes are being constructed. So it's important to kind of stay ahead of that. I mentioned Deb Johnston is here for any specific questions. With that, I'll kind of
Brent, before you go,
Yes.
and maybe Ally can or Deb. So we got the email, the council got the email regarding, and we saw the pictures of sediment in the water in the road. What occurred, I guess the question for somebody is, what occurred on private property? I don't want to excuse what's happened on the road, but I guess, the main concern is people's private residence, or one of the main concerns is what occurred on the private residence property. Did houses get flooded or?
So no damage to any private residence. There was a house that was flooded, but that house is, I'm sorry, hi, Ally Seaball with 4-Star. So no damage occurred to any of the private residences. There was a house that was flooded. That house is owned by 4-Star.
So that same house got flooded again, even though
Correct.
you own it now?
Mhm. Yeah, so we continue to deal with the same issue, and I don't know how familiar everyone is with the site and the site layout. But basically, after the original flooding event that occurred after Hurricane Helene, we hired an offsite or a third-party consultant to come evaluate the approved stormwater plans. And it was identified that there's about 5 acres of offsite runoff that wasn't accounted for in the original stormwater plans, and those plans were not designed or permitted by 4-Star. So that was prior to us coming online, but we did identify that and then subsequently submit additional stormwater control measures in order to try to capture that offsite runoff and get it into the detention system to be able to be treated and then ultimately discharged appropriately. We began installing that additional stormwater once it was approved beginning of June, and then we had those 2 rain events while the installation was going on. So the most significant one on June 29th, which was at 2 inches, that was while that stormwater was being installed. So now that stormwater is installed, and then as the pictures Brent showed, we've matted all of that area, applied seed, and then also some additional erosion control measures that are just temporary while we wait for that seed to grow so that we can converge the stormwater into the inlets and get them into the system.
And that's what you'll be working on for the next, you said you expect.
So that
to
is
be wrapped
complete.
up.
That is
Okay.
complete. Yep. So there is another run of storm that runs along the existing Half Moon Trail that has been there. That storm has not been installed because we have stopped any new land disturbance activities. But what was in progress when that rain event has happened, that has been completed. So we can get that area stabilized and start directing water into those inlets. But there is an additional run of storm that will need to be installed eventually. And then there are 2 additional phases that we are currently trying to permit additional stormwater measures that we believe need to be installed in order to address some of the longer term issues that we think the site might see. But the main area of issue is that phase 3, the western side of the site, the offsite run-on that's coming on and getting into that previously designed ditch.
As far as, and I'm looking a little bit at staff and all of us, how do we communicate this to the update so to speak, to the homeowners association. And that's something, a question, it's something we need to do. Have we done?
So I reached out, I think all of you were aware, I reached out to the HOA not long after they had made the complaint that we were working with Henderson County and the developer to try to get to a solution. I suppose the next step would be, I mean, I'm happy to update them. I think Deb has been in touch with the HOA at various points, and even former HOA members that still live in the neighborhood. I did want to state that, Deb and Mike and I met, and Chris Connor and I met yesterday, and we understand that there haven't been any, we have had other rain events in the area, but we have not, or they have not experienced any additional runoff.
Deb, sorry, we got the people online, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Deb Johnston with Henderson County Site Development. I spoke with the former HOA president yesterday, and he said that the subdivision in that area has had additional storm events, but they've not had any flooding or sediment going off property since we've had the NOV, and Four Star has stopped work and concentrated on stabilizing the site and putting the new storm offsite, the storm bypass. Yeah.
So back to your question, John, I'd be happy to, I think it could be a combined effort. Deb, I'm sure, could reach back out to the HOA, kind of give an update maybe on the NOV status.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
And I can work together on how best to communicate with the HOA, given the erosion control and the stormwater together, or Mike, we could probably figure this out together.
if y'all wouldn't mind, not putting you on the spot tonight, but if we could put correspondence together and reply to that email as a response, Madam Attorney, I think that would be okay to put a response that we met council, had this conversation, and staff would report back to the HOA that they've met with Four Star and others and understand the concern and the seriousness of it, and appears that we're making headway.
And, as we mentioned, July 29th, Four Star is going to provide I guess it's a response and to the NOV and a kind of a formal.
Yeah, so our plan of attack is to not only provide a response stating that we are now in compliance, but also the engineer is working on additional erosion control measures in order to continue to manage the stormwater until the permanent state can be installed. So that'll come directly from the engineer, who will handle that based on what their knowledge is of the site.
And that's coming next week?
Yeah, next week. We met with them yesterday just to kind of talk through their draft and where things stand, and
Okay.
then what we feel like we can get done by the 29th, and then what we can submit to Deb for approval, and then she'll sign off on it, and then we'll get the additional measures installed.
The council, if it's okay with you, maybe we wait until those additional measures are approved and we have a plan going forward. That way we can send one comprehensive email in response to that. That way we will have replied to the HOA and they can disseminate it among their homeowners, if that's okay. Thank you.
We'll do it.
Brent, thank you for arranging this, and thank you, Four Star, for coming. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of City Council. Adam Sturry, Utilities Director. In front of you is our Q2 2026 report, and I've got a link to it online. And I'm going to run through this pretty quickly today because it is kind of a business as usual operations for us in the water department. But I do want to just touch on a few things. So we treated 720 million gallons of water in the last quarter, and a 26% non-revenue water amount. That's about 53% of our treated capacity at the water plant. On the wastewater side, we treated 250 million gallons. Our average day was about 2.8 million gallons per day, and that is about 58% of our 4.8 million gallon per day capacity. So we had 0 sanitary sewer overflows in the last 3 months. I do want to take a minute it's on page 5, our financials. This is not audited because we're not there yet. We're still finalizing some FY26 purchases, and there's still some revenue to come in. But just to kind of summarize this very quickly, we're really about 93% expended of our budget. Again, there's still some more invoices that continue to come in or getting coded to last year, so that is not a finalized number. And then our revenues, again, really close to projected. There still are several weeks of utility bills that are still outstanding from customers because we bill like a month behind. But we did collect, looks like a little over $1 million over our miscellaneous revenue. So we saw our higher revenue generation in that. And I think a lot of that's due to our system development fees. We budget pretty conservatively on those, so we saw a little bit more fee uptick in that field. So financials looking good from the utility fund preliminarily, but I'm sure Crystal will give a full report when they do the audit in a few months or whenever that is. So.
Adam, one quick question,
Sure.
backing up just a little bit.
Yeah.
We know we're in great shape, and we'll talk about this in the water shortage response plan in a minute on the water side.
Mhm.
Wastewater treatment, if we go back 2 slides.
Yeah.
I don't want to prolong this a little bit, but just talk a little bit about, so our current capacity is 4.8 million.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about, you said we were at what, 2.8?
The average day was 2.8 million
So-
gallons per day. That's right.
And from a state, talk a little bit about the state permitting as far as when we get to 80%.
Sure.
You
So the state has what's called an 80-90 rule. So when we get to 80% of our permitted capacity, the state is going to require of us to have started an expansion. They want to see the preliminary plans and us moving in that direction, which we're doing. We've already started that to go to 6 million gallons per day currently. Once you get to 90% or above your permitted capacity, the state can place a sewer moratorium on your system. So they will not permit any additional sewer connections to your collection system until you increase your capacity. So you never want to get close to that 80 or 90% of your capacity. So right now, on the last month, we are at, the past 3 months, we were about 58% of our capacity, which we've kind of maintained since I've been here for 9 years in that 55 to 60% of capacity range.
The point I wanted to make is we're not close to that number. We're doing very well capacity-wise, and we're working very diligently to raise the funding to get us to that 6 million gallons per day, which will then put us even that farther, giving you that longevity as it relates to the wastewater plant.
Yeah. And I've got an update on the funding on that wastewater plant project here shortly. So thanks, John, for stopping on that. Moving along to new water connections, getting a little bit on growth. We saw 133 new water connections to the system in the past 3 months, and we saw 48 new sewer connections to the system. And you can see the breakdown between residential and non-residential. Again, primarily residential connections. Holding steady on disconnections for non-payment. Again, business as usual for our treatment solids, disposal management. One update on that, the biosolids thermal dryer, we're expecting that project to be operational in early 2027, so about 6 months from now, hopefully a little sooner. So I'll expect to see a very large decrease in the amount of solids we landfill when that project is completed. Moving on to safety incidences, we did have one reportable incident in the last quarter. So our quarterly TRC, or total recordable case rate, is 4.2. That's kind of in line with the state average. Vacancy rate had a drop there, about I think 4.2% vacancy rate. So we're filling those positions now. I do want to touch on a couple staff accomplishments and kudos to our staff members, Dana Reef and Darren Allman. Darren actually recently retired on the last day of June, but during the the annual inventory audit, those guys that manage our warehouse had a 99.6 total inventory accuracy rate out of our total inventory value of $1.38 million. So really good job to those guys and the tight controls, because it does get hectic back there sometimes when our crew members are grabbing parts to make repairs quickly. So I want to give those guys a good shout out. And then Alexander Lilly at our wastewater plant, he actually, I think this was back in April, went to Hendersonville Elementary School and taught over 300 students from grades 1 through 5 about wastewater treatment, and spent a lot of time on it. And he really tailored his instruction based on the age appropriate level. So, and our folks in the department, but those two MVPs really stuck out to me, and folks going above and beyond in their jobs there. Moving on, we did have, I'll talk about project funding here shortly, but we did host a cybersecurity tabletop exercise in June. That was, the EPA came in and helped perform that with us. That was a great exercise. We also conducted a water and wastewater energy efficiency workshop for 2 or 3 days here, and had some various staff members come in, and as well as other utilities in the area came in and took advantage of that training. That's all I have on the quarterly report. Does anyone have any questions before I move into project updates?
Adam's being pretty modest, folks. He's doing a lot of speaking and a lot of presentations to a variety of important EPA folks and state leaders in the world of water and wastewater. So, I mean, he's been pretty modest. He's put his staff out there, but he's quickly rising as being known as an expert as it relates to our utility, and I'm doing a great job. So I want to give him kudos for that, and under good leadership in the Public Services Department. So
Thanks, John.
good
Yeah.
job, Adam.
Good.
Are you going to touch on our grant funds? We got some.
I will, yes.
Okay.
I will touch on those,
All right.
and those are the project updates. So yeah,
Okay.
thanks for the reminder. And this is one of them. So our water distribution system resiliency looping project, this, just as a reminder, this is about 8 miles of water pipe. I've kind of shown the preliminary areas of where these sites will be. We're still finalizing the locations, but they're pretty spread out across the water system. And really the purposes of this is to provide a redundant water supply to some of these areas of our water system that only have a single feed, or there's a single pipe that feeds these areas. So really the major portions of the system that will benefit from this most directly are the northern portions of the system, kind of the Fletcher Mountain Home area, including Advent Hospital. They currently have a single feed to their service, so that Brookside Camp Road water line will give them a redundant or duplicate feed, but also the Edneyville Upward Road area. So in addition to redundant feeds, and this comes into the funding, so the new Borg-Warner project on McMurray Road, that Howard Gap Road water line will improve their hydraulics, pressure, and flow available. So this project's in design, and we're hoping to begin construction in late 2027. So an overview of funding on this project, there's $17.3 million of funding total towards this project. There's $6.75 million in an SRF grant. That's a state revolving fund grant. $1.86 million from a CDBG economic development grant, and then a $1.94 million through Golden Leaf funding. And then the other $6.75 million is a 0% interest loan through the state revolving fund program. So all those funding mechanisms fund this project, and we're really excited to get it underway. It is under design right now. So wastewater treatment facility improvements. So this project has been split. It's in our CIP split. There's the flood mitigation component and the expansion component. And generally, I think you guys are familiar, the flood mitigation is to elevate, relocate, and protect various process equipment. It just whether we're elevating or relocating really depends on that process equipment, but it carries a pretty large price tag of over $100 million. The expansion piece brings the permitted capacity of our facility to from 4.8 to 6 million gallons per day. It has about a $23 million cost estimate. We're at about a 90% design for these projects. They're being designed together, and we intend to bid them together and construct them together. An overview of funding. On the top table is the flood mitigation. Most recently, we received a $35 million low-interest loan through the Division of Water Infrastructure State Revolving Fund Program. You can see that on the right. That goes to another $3 million that we received earlier. So total, on the flood mitigation, we've received $11 million of grant and $39 million of low interest or 0% interest loan money. So almost halfway there for the flood mitigation component. For the expansion piece, we are awaiting a US EDA grant for a little over $20 million that we applied for, and we've secured $2 million so far from the Dogwood Health Trust. Significant savings from that $35 million low interest loan. Those loan rates are usually at or below half the market rate. So doing some estimates, we estimate that $35 million low interest loan will save our ratepayers $11 million just through financing if we were to go through a traditional financing method like a revenue bond or other mechanism. So good benefits in receiving that funding.
Adam, those SRF loans, are they 0% interest indefinitely, or is there a timeline to?
They are, so they're typically a 20-year loan. Yeah. And I think that's all I have for our departmental update. Thank you. And any questions in general?
Any questions? Sounds good. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Next, updated water response plan.
That has my name by it, but isn't that you?
Yeah.
Isn't that you, Adam?
Okay, I was wondering about that.
That would be a short presentation if I was giving.
Okay. All right, so water shortage response plan update. So what is a water shortage response plan? It's really in the name, but it's a tiered response for when we have a water supply shortage. So that can be caused from a variety of different reasons. For us, most commonly in the past, that's been for drought. But it could be contamination from one of your water supplies. You could have equipment failure or high system demands where, again, maybe we're over that 90% of what we can produce. This is legally mandated in North Carolina through that general statute. Really, this came about after North Carolina had some severe droughts, and I think about 2007, 2008, that's when this really became a law. And with our new French Broad River intake, we must update our water shortage response plan specifically for drought conditions. So I want to provide just a very brief overview of our water supply. You guys are very familiar with this, but the top two are in the Pisgah National Forest. We call them our mountain reservoirs. We have our Mills River intake on the main stem, and then our brand new French Broad River intake. The total capacity of these, we have over 31 million gallons per day of raw water capacity during normal conditions. During drought conditions, we have 17 or over. It just depends on how severe the drought is. I've thrown some numbers of our average day demands current or from 2025 and also what we're projecting in 2040, just so you can see how we're set up for the future and current needs. A stream gauge, our water shortage response plan, our water sources are rivers, and you measure river flows with stream gauges. So all stream gauges do, they're administered by the U.S. Geological Survey. They just measure the height of the river, and then from that height measurement, they can calculate how much flow is moving down the river. And the chart on the graph is where these stream cages are located. They're pretty much everywhere throughout the region, and they go back. They have a lot of data. A lot of them have close to 100 years of record data. So we can use that data to make some really good inferences on how we can predict the future, if you will. So our current water shortage response plan is just based on the Mills River stream gauge. So we can take a look at that stream gauge, and I'm sure you recall that we've entered our water shortage response plan many times in the past several years. I know 2004, 2003, I think 2019, don't quote me on that, but we were going into our water shortage response plan many times every few years. And you can see, based on the historical data in this chart, how often we were getting into our response, pretty often. So with the new French Broad River intake, that changes. So just a quick overview, instead of using just the Mills River gauge, we're moving this on to use 3 river gauges. There's 2 on the French Broad, one in Blantyre and Fletcher. The Blantyre gauge is in Etowah, and then the Mills River. So we've outlined these flow requirements. So all 3 gauges have to be at or below these flow parameters for us to enter a stage 1, 2, 3, or 4, respectively. When we have to be in that range for a 7-day average. We don't want just one day to dip down and then come back out of it. We wouldn't want to issue a response to our customers in that case. We also would want to wait 14 days before moving into the next severe stage. And that gives time for the water customers to really understand the notification and let that digest before we move it into another stage. And then to exit stage, we need to have a 7-day rolling average, no waiting period. So just an idea, really the takeaway here is we're going to use 3 river gauges for our response instead of 1, because we have multiple water sources, really being the French Broad River. So how do we set our stage triggers? So a river is 7Q10, so that's a hydrological benchmark, and it represents the lowest consecutive 7-day average stream flow that statistically occurs once every 10 years. And that number is important for the regulatory agencies, and what that means is we can withdraw 20% of that flow value, and the regulatory agencies broadly assume that at that flow rate that there will be no environmental impacts downstream. So we're leaving enough water in the streams for like the critters, the fish to survive and not have any issues. The triggers that I've outlined here are set by the utility, and they're a policy decision. And how we've outlined them is really we want to have the best stewardship of the resource. We always have 15 million gallons per day of capacity at the Mills River, or I'm sorry, excuse me, at the French Broad. However, during extreme droughts, maybe we want to tell our customers to not water their yards and be a good steward of the resource. So the different stages, 1, 2, 3, and 4, is really going down the list as a current. We can supply our current full capacity and still meet the 20% of the 7Q10. And what we would do on the first stage is all non-essential uses, and I'll get into the different uses in the next slide. We just a voluntary limit of those uses. And then moving down, we can supply our average day demand, still be within the 20% of the 7Q10. We have a mandatory restriction of non-essential uses, but we want to further limit or prohibit non-essential uses, and so on. Any questions on this slide as you move into the further results? Let me keep moving, and if you have any questions, we'll come back. The different uses of water, these are categorized in our plan. We're not suggesting any changes to our current response plan for here, but I did want to show this as a reminder. There's essential, socially, economically essential, and then non-essential. So generally, as we're moving to the more severe responses, we're going to start limiting and prohibiting these non-essential uses like washing vehicles or watering your yards. And as we get into the most severe stage 4, we would just want to be able to supply that essential top row of water uses. So that's generally how the plan works. Any questions?
Will you explain, I might have missed this, but on the last slide with the advisory stage, how do we determine that we're in the advisory stage?
Yeah, so the advisory stage is based on these flow numbers. So the Mills River gauge would have to be at or below 42
Gotcha. Okay,
CFS,
follow.
cubic feet per second. Blantyre 178 cubic feet per second, and then the Fletcher gauge at 237.
Okay, gotcha.
And I'll get into a little bit more on those numbers and how we got there, but really it's how much water is being taken out of the river, and we want to keep enough water in the river after.
Thank you.
Yeah. So again, really we're not suggesting any changes to what we're considering these uses, but I did just want to provide this as a reminder on what they are. So frequency analysis. So at those triggers, those flows that we've projected, we've looked back at some of these gauges. I think the Blantyre and the Mills River have over 88 years of data. So we wanted to know, with these flow parameters, how often are we going to enter, or how often would we have entered into these response stages? So stage 1, we would have entered a stage 1 response in 1954, 2002, and 2008. So 3 years out of, I think, roughly 88 years of data, we would enter a stage 1, which is just the voluntary, don't wash your cars, limit lawn watering. The most severe drought on record, 1954, we would have entered a stage 2. Based on the triggers that we've established and our new water supply, based on historical data, we would have never entered a stage 3 or 4 in our water shortage response plan from drought. So a really significant improvement with the additional water source on the French Broad. So another small change to our plan. The current plan is on the top, and the proposed plan at the bottom. I do want to bring attention to the stage titles. It was very confusing to administer the stage titles in our previous plan with an alert level 1, stage 2A. So we've moved to a more simple, just level 1 advisory, warning, alert, emergency, just to convey that information a little bit easier to the public. We've also modified our reduction goal slightly. I can tell you when we've entered these stages in the past, we did not see anywhere near double-digit reduction numbers, and thought that a 5% reduction goal on stage 1 was a little more reasonable. And that's more in line with what I've seen in other utilities across the state on their water shortage response plans. So we've slightly modified our reduction goal. The allowable rate surcharges, we are in our plan, we may provide a surcharge in stages 2, 3, and 4. That remains the same, as well as the effectiveness, whether it's voluntary, mandatory. We're not proposing to change any of those. So again, summary of changes. Really, the big take home is the likelihood reduction. So we're 99.5% less likely to enter a stage 1 of our water shortage response plan, 99.9% less likely for stage 2, and then I'm not going to say 100%, just because it's never happened in the past, because again, this is based on 88 years of statistical data, and we all know that we had a over 1,000 year storm event on the other side of the spectrum 2 years ago, so there's nothing saying that we can't have a very extreme drought on the dry side, but based on the data that we have, we would never have entered a stage 3 or a 4 based on the records on file. So, and then yeah, minor revision of stage titles, reduction goals. Really, the major changes here is just for the new intake. So, I know that was a lot of numbers and statistics, and but feel free to, if there's any questions.
Just want to say that, your major investment, is paying out for our community and residents of the county. I will say too that this is based on current data. I mean, if some of our peers downstream or upstream, start taking more water out, that we may have to adjust this a little bit. So it's where we are today. So just be aware there's still some external factors out there that we will may have to review in the future. But that's just the nature of the business. I mean, if you see that around the state too, as you see some of the permitting that's trying to go on between the Catawba Basin, between the Hickory area and the Charlotte Basin, and inter-basin transfers and stuff. So what one community does can impact the amount of water that's in the stream and vice versa. So just, it's never 100%, right, Adam?
That's right. Yep.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Should be good news for our water users. Right, next, proposed utility billing policy changes. Crystal and Angie?
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of council. I'm here before you to talk about the utility billing and collection recommendations that staff would like to make. We've been doing a pretty comprehensive overview of our billing policy over a little bit over a year at this point, and we even brought in an independent company to come in and do a business review and make recommendations. So we had a full report from them, and we've taken those ideas into consideration along with looking at our billing policy that really hasn't been updated in many, many years, along with making sure that our ordinance is in line with our billing policy and that it's also in line with our contract with our customers. So we're doing kind of a big overhaul of just making sure everything is streamlined, that we're going in line with best practice for utilities and protecting the utility revenue. This first slide will pretty much tell you the story of why this is so important. So our total uncollected utility balance currently sits at $844,000. 92% of that is balances that are 120 plus days old. So pretty much this is comprised of mainly two categories. We have inactive accounts, about 4,800 accounts that make up $621,000. We have suspended accounts, 240 that make up $223,000. And overall, what we've been doing over the years is using debt set-off, but debt set-off is not working well for us. We're getting very little, we're receiving very little from what we're sending them. So we're gonna bring before you some of the ideas that we have, that some of these we've already put in place. So I want to walk through how unpaid balances occur, just to give you an understanding of what makes up inactive accounts versus suspended. So in the inactive accounts, what typically happens is a customer moves out and then they have a final bill with us that they're responsible for paying. So most of the time, well, they either have a security deposit on file with us. It really depends, you know, when somebody opens up a new account with us, based on their credit and our fee schedule, we determine whether they have a security deposit and what that amount is. And then at that point, that security deposit may cover the bill, it may not cover the bill, and what's left is what is remaining as unpaid and what you're seeing in our inactive accounts that we just are not able to collect. And then we have suspended accounts. These are accounts where the water has been disconnected, they're no longer receiving water due to non-payment, but our base charges keep accumulating. So those charges rack up on those accounts and the balance just continues to grow and be unpaid. At this point, a lot of those suspended accounts are, we just can't track down the owners, or the tenant has left and they haven't told us, or the owner hasn't told us. So those are problematic accounts that we're running into. So we have large balances that just continue to age that we're trying to come up with a solution on. What we've already done, so as I mentioned before, we've done the independent utility billing business review. That was a complete review of our operational procedures, our billing policy. We looked at security deposits, which we've already Basically, we've revised our security deposits, so they were adopted in the FY27 fee schedule, and that is based on that utility billing business review. So we do feel that our current security deposits, we analyzed them against customer history and usage and our balances, and we do think that one change that we've already done is going to have a big impact on our balances moving forward as well. We've benchmarked against municipal utility best practices and have a roadmap for improvements. We've also strengthened our internal operations. The finance department has been restructured. The responsibilities have been restructured, the positions, and we have a dedicated collection specialist, which we've never had that position before. So we're committed to taking a big priority on getting our collections down and trying to collect on that lost revenue that we've not been able to do in the past. We've got a bigger focus on delinquent account management and trying to get that under control. So we're improving collection efforts by partnering with a collection agency. So we may still use debt set-off in parallel with this collection agency, but we've basically contracted with a collection agency. They will charge us 30% for everything they collect, which is reasonable when you compare against other collection agencies. We've established formal collection procedures, and we're expanding our tools and ACH campaigns, hoping that we can get more customers set up on ACH that might also help resolve some of the problems that we're running into with balances. And as I mentioned, we've already updated our security deposit requirements. That was the first comprehensive review and change that we did to that fee schedule for the security deposits in 7 years. So that should have a pretty good impact as well. And that's going to make the deposits better aligned with customer risk and utility usage and help reduce future bad debt and protects paying customers. Our guiding principles are fiscal responsibility. Ultimately, we're trying to protect utility revenues that fund city services and infrastructure. Customer fairness, we're trying to treat customers consistently and equally under policy and ordinance. We are trying to look for, there's some inconsistencies between some of our policies and our contracts, and we're trying to use this as a time to try to get some of that gray area out of there and streamline and make things much easier for our staff and for our customers to understand. Operational efficiency, we're trying to simplify the administration and again, improve consistency. And then of course, governance and compliance, we want to make sure we're legally protected and doing, following best practice. Why are we proposing changes? These are recommendations designed to reduce our bad debt overall, try to have more, improve our revenue recovery and get more than we've been able to collect on, improve our collection rates, again, protect utility revenue, sustainability of long-term rates, protect the paying customers that are actually paying. We don't want to, because they're paying, we don't want to penalize them. So we're trying to make sure we've got procedures in place that we're protecting those paying customers and helping rates not to be increased by being able to keep things affordable and being able to collect on those balances that are sitting out there. And then we're providing consistency, again, between our ordinance, our billing policy, and our customer contracts and legally protecting the city. So these are the recommended council actions that I would like to bring before you. The biggest thing that we're trying to change, and this is going to be really with our contracts, our contract terms, and we're trying to clarify property owner and tenant responsibilities so that we do have the ability to collect on these balances. We're trying to reduce days of exposure from 96 to 68 days, and I'll go into more detail on that for disconnection of service. Update our leak adjustment policy, do a few updates on our corrective billing and late fee policy as well. And then overall, this is just improving our collection processes and then aligning our ordinance billing policy and contract terms. So this slide is important because this has to do with our customer contracts. And right now, our biggest challenges and what's driving our balances, our aging and our bad debt, is that when a tenant or an owner leaves or stops service without paying the remaining balance, the collection opportunities are very limited. We've really not been able to collect on those. And then what happens is either that owner or that tenant ends up turning in a new service agreement with us for service at another location. And right now, we have no method in place that we can tell that customer that they have to pay their prior balance on their pre-existing account. So right now, our practice has been that that person leaves that property, they open up a new service request on their new property, and then we allow them to, but we've had no method to be able to hold them accountable for paying from their old account. So what we're doing is working with Angie on updating contract terms that will allow us to be able to do that going forward, where we can, basically tell those customers that they cannot get new service with us until their prior balance is paid. And then the other thing we're going to be doing is when somebody puts in, so sometimes we don't even get disconnect forms on accounts. So we're going to also be able to transfer service automatic. So this is like in your instances when you have a tenant and they leave. Now we're going to be able to basically just transfer that service back into the owner's name until a new tenant moves in. That's going to be one thing that we're changing as well and putting into our contract language. We're also recommending that we're no longer going to require owner deposits for non-owner occupied property. So that would be properties where those owners typically would have a tenant. So if they have a tenant in that property, that tenant leaves and it gets transferred back in the owner's name. At that point, we're not going to make that owner have a deposit because we know that they're probably going to have a tenant back in that property soon. So rather, this is going to make the process much more efficient, and hopefully, the owners will get less frustrated with that because we're not going back and forth with, now you need a deposit or we're refunding a deposit. So we're just basically going to say that no owner deposit is required for non-owner occupied properties. And then we're going to come up, currently we don't really have a formal process for disputing amounts owed, so we're going to formalize a process for that. And then overall, all these recommendations are going to, we're going to have to change ordinance, policy, and contract to make sure they're all in alignment. As a result of these changes, we're going to have improved collections, reduce our bad debt, hold owners, tenants more accountable for the balances on their accounts before they, can start service on a new account. We're also recommending to reduce the number of days of exposure. So days of exposure is kind of like a liability for the city because those days of exposure are from the last read date of the meter, and basically those days. So right now you can say for service date through say June 30th, you start counting. And then our current process is 96 days from that date before disconnect. So what we're recommending is to reduce that by 4 weeks. And if somebody has a balance not paid within 68 days, we would then disconnect them for service for an unpaid utility account. So that is a 4-week, it's 4 weeks sooner, but we're also going to be updating our bills. So currently our customer bills have no date on there that says when disconnect is. What we're going to do is make that more transparent. The disconnection date will now appear directly on customer bills. So they will be able to see if they don't make payment, this is the date, by this date, they're going to be disconnected. customers do receive multiple notifications from the city, so we do give ample opportunity for that customer to make payment. We have 4 separate notices that go out before a customer is disconnected. And this will also help customers because now to get reconnected, they won't have such a large balance. Whereas before they were accumulating a much larger balance. Now that we're doing it 4 weeks earlier, that balance that they have to pay to get reconnected is going to be much lower. We're also recommending leak adjustment changes. I just want to give a quick overview of what is eligible versus what's not eligible. And the eligible is going to be like your underground service line leaks, hidden plumbing or fixture failures, sudden pipe burst, service line failures not due to customer action, internal leaks not visible or reasonably discoverable. And then the preventable that we're not allowing leak adjustments on are going to be things like faucets or spigots left running, hoses left on, irrigation systems left operating unattended, or just customer negligence. And we do have a leak adjustment request form. It's available on the city's website under customer service. To outline so here's our current versus our proposed. I'll go through this quickly, but our current policy does not have any language in there regarding preventable leaks versus non-preventable. So at this moment, we're currently doing leak adjustments for all types of leaks. We're proposing that we only do leak adjustments for preventable leaks. And then also currently we're doing 1 adjustment every 36 months, and we would like to help the customers out and allow them to be eligible for 1 adjustment every 24 months. And then we're doing $5 minimum leak adjustments right now to qualify for processing. We really don't have many people that fall under $5, and just the administrative burden on that, we're recommending to change that to $20. We currently have a $1,000 maximum adjustment allowed for water and sewer combined. We're recommending to move that up in the customer's favor to be $3,000 maximum adjustment allowed. We also currently do not require proof of leak being repaired, and we're asking that going forward we do have proof that the leak is repaired. The only other thing here is just like our calculation internally. So right now our leak adjustments are calculated using lowest volumetric rate. And then there's also a fixed dollar adjustment attached to that. We're recommending that we do the leak adjustments based on customers' normal water usage rate, and it just makes it more equitable and consistent. And I'll show you what that looks like. So currently, we took several different leak adjustments to make sure we were looking at a good population of kind of our minimum leaks to our average to our highest, and we wanted to make sure it was equitable and also would benefit the customer. So you could see a couple different scenarios we ran through, what the current amount is and then the proposed. So all of those are fairly in line with what they were before, but it is benefiting the customer and giving them a little bit more help. And then in FY26, we had 429 leak adjustments totaling about $216,000. And on average, they were about $505 per adjustment. Only about 8.62% of our leak adjustments exceeded $1,000. And that's why we feel that proposing a $3,000 max is really just going to benefit those really, really big leak adjustments where we run into and we have customers get pretty upset when, you know, we can't offer them a little bit more relief there. We have fewer than 1% of leak adjustments that were under $20. The other change we would like to do is for our corrective billing. Currently, we do corrective billing for a customer on a 2-year correction if the customer is underbilled. And then if they are overbilled, we will go back indefinitely as far as our system will allow us to go back. We are proposing to streamline that and keep it consistent. And we would like to keep the 2-year correction for underbilled, but we are recommending to change it to 2 years also when it comes to a customer being overbilled. And then our late fee penalties, currently they are assessed 10 days after the due date. We are trying to, this is one of the recommendations too from our consultant that came in, is that most places, just best practice is to assess it immediately. So we're looking to assess that 1 day after the due date and make that change. And then just a recap of everything. These are all benefits to the city by these changes that we want to do. So these initiatives are really designed to protect the utility revenue, improve collection rates, minimize the financial burden on our paying customers, and then, making sure that we're creating consistency and efficiency in what we do every day and making things easier across the board for our staff and also for customers, and just streamlining our processes. Is there any questions? Well, let me see. One more slide. Sorry. This is what we're proposing. So our implementation timeline. So we're presenting tonight, and then we're requesting council feedback by the August 6th council meeting. And then if adopted at the September 3rd, we would do an effective go live, or we're proposing October 1st. And then in order to make that happen, our implementation steps would be, we would do a lot of staff training. There would be lots of customer notifications that go out. So that would be a combination of letters that would go out in the bills that the customer receives. So everybody should get a bill and get a letter in there that will go through our changes that we're doing. Social media, website, and then we'll also be contacting realtors and attorneys about our new processes, so they can pass that information out as well when people buy new homes and do that. And then the contract process, we want to make this easy. So we're not going to require owners and tenants to submit new contracts for this. This would be a phase thing. So as new service agreements start or disconnects, at that point in time, we would require a new contract. If owners, if customers want to do a new contract before then, they can, to streamline the process, but they're not required to. But we would also allow them to do this electronically. So we would streamline the process, make it as easy as possible for the customer, where they could just submit everything electronically along with their signature. And then during this transition phase, so we've talked about doing the credit card fees, passing that along to the customer starting October 1st. So we would tie all of this in together with and what we would do, because the disconnect date would be changing 4 weeks earlier, and that's, a process for customers to get used to, is we want to allow a transition period. So we would allow at least 2 months for customers to get used to the new processes, and we would waive all late fees and delinquent account fees during those 2 months so that people would get used to the processes. Are there any questions?
Crystal, I have a question. How many years or days a month have it been for this debt of $800 and some thousand to accumulate?
It's hard to say, but for a while. Because, these are things that have just been accumulating, and we transitioned from Munis to our new utility billing software back in 2020. So it's hard for me to really identify that history going back, but a big portion of it, a big portion of it, I would say, is in the last probably 10 years.
Okay, now since a collection specialist position has been implemented, have you seen any progress as far as collecting this delinquent money so that we do not have to absorb any more of it?
So we have been establishing those practices, and we're partially waiting on some of the contract language to be updated. We've got everything in place. So we're ready to go. We've already signed the contract with the collection agency. We're coming up with our practices right now, and we're ready to pretty much hit the ground running. But we do want to make sure that these things are approved, and some of the contract language, like we can already get started on some of these things, but some of what we can send to the collection agency, we also want to be able to have the contract terms in place going forward as well. But we're finalizing our processes in finance, so I would expect that within the next probably 2 months, 1 to 2 months, that we'll be able to start sending the files. And I'll be able to report on, you know, how that is, what the results are looking like for us and if it's working.
Do you think this will work? 10 years from now, we won't have twice the amount owed to us?
And we can only
That's a lot of revenue,
submit,
lost revenue.
yeah, we can only submit back so far. So I believe at this point, I'll have to look, but I feel like it's only about 6 years back. So already anything before that, pretty much we don't have any collection methods. We could try reaching out to the customer, but a lot of times those customers have already moved on and we don't have good contact information. So the older it gets, the less you're going to be able to collect it. So we're already going to have, you know, a lot of balances to write off. But basically, we're not, from a financial statement perspective, every year we're required for our audit to record allowance for uncollectible accounts. So even if we have to write off those really old balances, we've practically already wrote them off on the books. So every year our revenue, even though we're not sending it to a collection agency or haven't been, and we haven't been collecting that, from a financial standpoint, our financial statements already reflect our allowance for bad debt. So we're not going to get hit with this huge write-off in the end. But it will be a benefit to us because we've already basically allowed for that bad debt and have already recorded it each year. So if we start getting this money, it's going to boost our revenue because we've already written it off in prior years. But from a software perspective, those accounts still carry those balances. We haven't wrote it off on the software, but on the financial statements, in effect, we've already basically reduced our revenue for this bad debt every single year because we're required to do that from an accounting standpoint. So this would only be a big benefit to us. Any bit of money we can, you know, get from this will just boost our revenue from what we've already had to write off. So.
Crystal, I know you're going to bring this back to us, but just in the interest of like thinking ahead, one thing that I had a question about when you were going through was the late fee assessment period is a really sharp decline. And I'm wondering if maybe we could look at, or if y'all have already thought about like a middle ground grace period of 5 days instead of dropping from 10 to 1, because I'm thinking about like how people maybe prioritize their like monthly bill, and putting, you know, taking away that extra 9 days might really strap some people, especially if it happens suddenly. So I'm just wondering if y'all have like tossed around any number of numbers there, or if one seems like the best way to do it.
No, that's a good question. We have talked about that and definitely would be open to doing that. I think, you know, the biggest thing for us that's really going to make a big impact is the disconnection being 4 weeks earlier.
Yeah.
So if we can at least do that, I think, you know, we could find a happy middle ground on the late fees, and because it is a big change. I agree with you on that, but, you know, we're trying to do kind of, it's like, well, here's your late fee. You know, most places you go, there's not any kind of grace, but it is, you know, they're used to that 10 days. So if you guys feel more comfortable doing something and finding a middle ground, we're definitely open to that and think that would be fine. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I think that would be wise.
Okay.
And that's the great total policy decision. But I will just point out, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't point out, one reason we're at this point is we are growing from a small town, small utility, taking care of our people, being concerned about them, and maybe not being as we needed to be, and they were able to leave, and maybe that's how we got in this spot a little bit. But I think it is just point out that the utility's growing. It's becoming more professional. There's more eyes on us to make sure we account for this money. So it's a fine balance that council has to make, because you have to represent our customers, right? And you want to take those that may need those extra 5 days. But it just needs to be reasonable, and it needs to be that we can't hold hands quite like we may have done in the past, because that's kind of how we've gotten there. So.
And the one thing I want to point out is that in the billing cycle, if the bill goes out on the first day, they have until the 15th day already to pay. And so that it would be the 16th day under what Crystal's proposing. And so if you go to 5 days, it would be the 20th day. But they already have 2 weeks to pay, is what I'm saying. And I just wanted everybody to realize that as you're considering when to assess the late fee.
And then it encroaches more on if we're moving the disconnect date up, and, it encroaches more on the disconnect date if you're still leaving your late fee out there. But, yeah.
Absolutely a council policy call. Absolutely. Good question. Good job, Crystal.
Thank you. Complicated processes here. Right, data center moratorium update.
Okay, good evening, good afternoon. I'm here per your request to talk about the potential imposition of a moratorium on data centers. This has been a learning experience for me to look into this, because I probably knew the least about data centers of anybody in the room. I still don't know a whole lot, but I have looked at a few things. Just to begin with, data centers, I found a report that was drafted by the Congressional Research Service, and I pulled some things out of that. But in its simplest form, a data center is a physical facility that houses and runs large computer systems. Typically has multiple servers, data storage devices, and network equipment that can provide IT infrastructure service for organizations to store, manage, and process and transmit large amounts of data. So as we're going forward, I thought it was important to remember there are different levels, right? Just as anything else, there are different levels of data centers. You could say we have a data center, as we're getting our servers in-house in a closet. It can go from that all the way up. And so in the business, there are enterprise data centers. Some of the terminology is enterprise data center, where one company builds, owns, and operates its own on-premise data center. A managed data center is usually owned and operated by a third-party company, and smaller companies co-locate their data processing equipment there and rent space. Then, of course, we all know about cloud data centers that are geographically distributed and interconnected and allow multiple users to remotely access computing resources. And then there are edge data centers, where these larger companies have smaller ones that are closer to the customers, the accessor, the people that access the data to provide better service. And then this, I believe, is the one why we are here. Any of the foregoing, I guess, could be what's called a hyperscale data center. And in the industry, to be considered a hyperscale data center, you have to have at least 5,000 computer servers and a large scale of network equipment, occupy at least 10,000 square feet of physical space, and have an electrical power rating exceeding 100 megawatts. And those are the ones that we typically tend to hear about, are these very, very large scale data centers. So as you move forward and consider regulating data centers, you're going to have to define them and define what level you want to regulate. And so the first definition here is one that is out of the Energy Independence and Security Act, and it's pretty general. And then there is the one that is in the current bill that is probably going to pass at the state legislature. Senate Bill 730, and it has a threshold of 100 megawatts or greater. And then the last one is the one that was recently adopted by Henderson County, and it's based on square footage, 4,000 square feet or greater, containing a grouping of data servers and equipment. And then they exclude cryptocurrency because they have a whole different definition of cryptocurrency mining centers, but they are something that I think that you would want to include in any regulation that you do because they are large users of electricity and water as well. So why all the concern? As you know, they have high energy consumption and water consumption and noise. And then there is a proliferation. I found a mapping service that has mapped all the data centers that, you know, are publicly known. And there are a lot of them. And AI is driving a lot of this, as well as the cryptocurrency mining. Another concern is outdated local regulations, i.e. ours. That we don't have adequate regulations in place to be prepared to deal with these large-scale mega centers if one was to come. And I will tell you, I've seen examples of a city block size for 3 or 4 story building that is a data center, not necessarily, you know, 1,000-acre parcels. So they come in all shapes and sizes. And then things like incentives, like for instance, in North Carolina, they don't pay sales tax on electricity that is provided to them. So that's a huge savings for them. And some of the legislation that has been introduced has been to remove that exemption. But of course, it's something that they were granted incentives to come here many years ago. And North Carolina is one of the only states that doesn't have an expiration date on those sales tax exemptions. So that is encouraging them to come to North Carolina. So these are all reasons why, you know, we are concerned about data centers. So to get into a moratorium, and what is a moratorium? A moratorium is a temporary halt of development. It's where you mandate that for a period of time, no data centers could be developed in the city. And so I'm going to go through this in quite a lot of detail. I'm aware of at least one lawsuit where Chatham County has been challenged on their moratorium by a data center moratorium. And moratoria, when I started in this business, were pretty easy. Now they're kind of complicated if you do them correctly. So they have to be of a reasonable duration, first of all, in light of the circumstances. And they can't exceed the period of time that you've determined is necessary to correct, modify, or resolve the conditions that warranted the moratorium in the first place. And what does the moratorium apply to? It applies to development approvals. So if you put a moratorium in place, it would say none of the following can be issued in favor of a data center. So a development approval is administrative or quasi-judicial, and it's things like zoning permits, site plan approvals, special use permits, certificates of appropriateness, building permits. Any of those permits would be halted. None of those could be issued during the moratorium. You can't adopt a moratorium governing residential uses. We aren't talking about that, so that's not of concern to us. A public hearing is, of course, required. And if it's 60 days or less, it's just a 7-day notice. If it's 61 or more days, you have to comply with the normal zoning notice requirements before the public hearing. And then certain projects would be exempted. So if we had somebody that had already gotten a building permit, for instance, or applied for a special use permit or had a common law vested right, those would be exempted. And then permit choice applies. And so permit choice means that if somebody came in and submitted a complete application and the rules change between the time they submit the application, you know, after they've submitted their application, then they get to pick whether they want the old rules or the new rules to apply. That's already in place for a lot of things, and that'll apply here too. So this is the crux of it though, and that is you have to make certain findings when you're putting a moratorium in place. You have to outline the problems or conditions necessitating the moratorium. And so you have to also state what alternatives to a moratorium that you considered and why those alternatives aren't adequate. You have to say which of those development approvals, which of those permits will be subject to the moratorium. You've got to say a date for the termination and then why it's necessary. You've got to make a finding why it's necessary. So if you did a 6-month, why is it necessary for it to be 6 months? Or if you did it for a year, why is it necessary to be a year long? And then you've got to have an action plan in your ordinance. You've got to say exactly the steps that you're going to take and by a date by which you're going to take those steps during the moratorium to address whatever those problems or conditions you're trying to address. And then let's say you set it for 6 months and determined we needed 9 months. You can't extend it unless you've done everything that you said you were going to do in your action plan and new facts and conditions arise that warrant the extension or the renewal of the moratorium. So, data center moratorium steps forward. So I recommend that we collect data, right? And so that you can have some specific findings in your ordinance as to why a moratorium is necessary. I gave you a few of those reasons at the very beginning. What alternatives are there to a moratorium, and are they sufficient, and why or why not? We got to, make those findings. And then based on 1 and 2, if those alternatives are not sufficient, how long should the moratorium last? And then which development approvals should it apply to? And then you have to put together the proposed action plan and the time frame for each step, and then you have your public hearing and make all these findings. So those would be the steps forward. And then I have a motion. One thing, we don't usually set public hearing by motion, but some of the cutoff times for people being able to get an application in are from the call of the public hearing in the statute. And so I felt it was advisable to go ahead and, if you want to consider it, go ahead today and call the public hearing, so that some of those timeframes would go ahead and the clock would start running on some of those approvals. So, Madam Mayor, I'm happy to try and answer any questions. Otherwise, if you do want to move ahead, I do have a proposed motion that I left the blank off for the date, but how many months and the date would also need to be filled, the date of the proposed. I don't think it has to go to planning board. You may want to send it to planning board out of an abundance of caution or just to get their advice. But I've determined I don't think you have to send it to planning board. So the main time frame you have to meet is to give staff enough time to put together enough data to support all those findings, and then do the notice. And the notice is once a week for 2 successive calendar weeks. The first time not more than 10 days or 25 days and not less than 10 days before the hearing. So it's about a 30-day notice period, you might as well say, by the time you do the twice a week in the newspaper.
So can I ask a question before the council? Because I'm sure council's going to want us to recommend the number of months that it may take to do this. Has there been a conversation between community development and legal that I'm not aware of about how many months we think will take to do this and to do the research? And so have we put any thought to that about the number of? The answer, he said, is no for the public who can't hear him.
No, we have not. We have not had that conversation. Okay. Typically, I've seen most places do 12 months.
Okay.
And I don't know that that's an unreasonable period of time. It's according to how long it would take, because to develop the ordinance is going to take some workshops and some determination of what level we're going to regulate, what level of data center you want to regulate, and I think you would need a lot more information before you could just, make that call. And so I would say 6 to 12 months would be, reasonable.
So that would be my first question, that then council, your moratorium would be 6 to 12 months, but.
Well, can I say one more thing? That's why I worded it like I did, not to exceed 12 months, so that when we come back for the public hearing, we could have a better recommendation. recommendation on the number of months. But if it doesn't exceed 12 months, that's what would go in the notice. So people would know the max time would be 12 months. But after we get together between now and the public hearing, if we determine, well, 9 months is sufficient, then you could set it at 9 months when you actually adopt it. So I was trying to do a not to exceed since we hadn't determined how long we need.
And then the other question is, I would suspect we would not call the public hearing for 2 weeks from now, because there would need to be a little bit of work
Yeah.
go into this. So then, if they adopted this tonight, then we would be expecting the public hearing to happen at the September meeting, assuming whatever date that is, that September meeting. So that'd be the other thing is, so we would call the public hearing tonight to not exceed 6 or 12 months, and the public hearing would then be held at the September, and I'll look up that date in just 1 minute, but,
Yes. So where it says to be held, insert on September blank at 5:45.
and I'm gonna look that up right now.
September 3rd.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, so just to clarify, first we have to do research before we can enact a moratorium.
Yes, ma'am.
And that, it appears, could be done within the next 5
Month.
weeks or thereabouts. And the purpose of the moratorium then is to allow time to develop zoning or whatever restrictions we would want to have.
Yes, ma'am, to develop
Okay.
the regulation.
Okay. So we're clear what we're doing when, what the purpose of this is.
Yes, and I think the initial research would just be researching literature on the impacts, talking with other jurisdictions to say, what impact have these data centers had? And so that you could make the finding that, they use 30% of our city's water supply, or I'm making that up, but you know what I mean? Or our power bills went up, X amount, so you could talk about the adverse impacts. And then the fact that our ordinance is outdated and really isn't prepared to address it, and the fact that they're being proliferated. We know all these things, but we could get some data and statistics to illustrate the proliferation of them. So yes, ma'am, it's a largely just research exercise, the first part.
And then we'd have a public hearing, and then from the policy standpoint, council can decide whether they actually enact a moratorium up to this length of time.
Yes, they could, you don't have to. You could,
Yeah.
This is just setting a public hearing to consider it. And then at that time, you would determine the length of it.
And we could, in
So-
that time, staff could look at our schedules and our projects and look at what an ordinance drafting and whether we need the whole 12-month or whether we need only 6 months or 3 months or so forth. So,
Yes. So I would recommend you say a maximum of 12 months to give the most flexibility there.
then we would have the final schedule as part of the public hearing
Yes,
in September.
because you have to put that action plan in the ordinance, so it would be a very regimented schedule.
Angie, I know that they just changed the county's UDO around this. Does that have any impact on anything that we would look at, or do we know yet?
So you can choose to, well, they enacted a 2-mile separation rule, a 2-mile separation from a school or a residence, or
Okay.
I don't even know all the different uses. So that's what they've done. That wouldn't exactly work for us
Yeah,
because of our size.
yeah, okay.
But I think like their definition probably isn't a bad definition. Their cryptocurrency center definition looked pretty good to me as well. So there might be some things like that we could, borrow
on.
and implement as well.
Okay,
But this would apply in our city limits and our ETJ, because their ordinance does not apply in our ETJ.
So So do we need to approve that motion tonight?
I would recommend it, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That back up.
Throw it back up there.
There we go. And I did have information about the Senate bill that's pending, if you would like to hear that. It is just going to require a site assessment when a data center is coming. They're going to have to examine the sound profile, and then in addition, the city can require them to examine the effect on water resources, air, blah, 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 blah. And then they're going to implement water use standards, prohibit certain foreign ownership, require a utility service agreement be entered with the electrical provider to help govern and control the cost of service for the data centers, a provision that says we can't condemn property for a data center or offer economic development incentives. So that is the bill that is likely gonna, it's passed the Senate, it passed the House made an amendment, so it's just going back for concurrence in the amendment. So, I don't know.
Madam Mayor,
Mhm.
I move that a public hearing be scheduled to consider the adoption of an ordinance imposing a moratorium not to exceed 12 months on all development approvals required for the development of a data center or cryptocurrency mining facility within the planning and zoning jurisdictions of the city of Hendersonville, to be held at 5:45 p.m. on September 3rd, or as soon thereafter as City Council may hold the hearing at City Operations 305 William Street, Hendersonville, North Carolina, in the large first floor meeting room.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Not, those in favor of scheduling this public hearing say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Ayes have it, motion carries, and we can do advertising and whatever all else we need to do. Thank you for the research. Okay. Anyone have anything else they want to bring up tonight?